Your firm makes a lot of predictions. So I wanted to ask you to help me try and look forward as to how this conflict might end. We're in a position now where it seems that the US aren't going to give up the demand to Iran that they cease to develop and pursue nuclear enrichment. It appears that Iran have said that they want the right, and they believe they have the right, they said this before this conflict started, to enrich uranium and to have nuclear power plants and all these kinds of things. So how does this end? Like Trump's now, he's blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. We're in another standoff.
The ceasefire's in place.
The ceasefire's in place, which I think he said was 14 days. And we're now probably, got 9-10 days left of that.
Yeah.
He's thinking a lot about his legacy. He can't be re-elected. He talks sometimes about, winning the Peace Prize and wanting to be on a Mount Rushmore of presidents and all this. So he can't just leave. If he just leaves, then Iran carry on with their enrichment program. It goes down in history, almost like a Bush failure, geopolitical failure. He can't just leave. He has to be seen to win. But also Iran can't let him be seen to win. So what happens?
I think unlike almost anybody else you can imagine, if he decided that he wanted to end this, he could end this. He could just leave and he would say, I won. He's already said this in different ways. It's, I don't even care about the nukes because we've already entombed them. They're under all this rubble. We've got satellite coverage. If the Iranians try to get at them, we can hit them back. He's already said that there's already a regime change. It's already new people. We can work, we can talk with these people. He already said the Strait isn't his problem, right? But of course, he's also said different things, sometimes in the same tweet, right? So he's picking and choosing. But what I'm suggesting to you is that Trump has already moved towards de-escalation.
You're spot on when you say he set the stage to back out. We won. Regime change. The Strait's not my problem. We have our own oil, blah, 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 blah. But then, if you don't open that Strait, I'm going to end civilization.
Yeah.
So which didn't seem to fit. It seemed like he was setting the stage to back out, and then suddenly the civilization tweet, I'm going to bomb your bridges and your nuclear power plants, which suddenly made me think, okay, so maybe he does really care about
and wasn't plausible, by the way. Yeah. I mean, there was no chance that he was actually going to do all that evening.
So why didn't he just back out?
Well, I do not want to be Trump's psychologist. Right? It is very clear that he is impulsive and that he does not have much impulse control, nor does he create around him mechanisms that create impulse control, that enforce impulse control. He's on his phone all the time. He watches the media relentlessly. People engage with him from all over the world on his cell phone, and he has recency bias. The thing he heard and saw last, he frequently focuses on.
But he also watches the markets.
Yes.
He seems obsessed with the stock market.
That's why so many of the announcements he makes are right before or right after the market opens. And obviously there's been a lot of insider trading concerns around that too. And he's concerned about personal enrichment and people around him making billions of dollars. That plays in too. I wish it didn't. It's horrible to talk about it, but you can't avoid that topic. What happens? You want to know what happens? I don't have a crystal ball. No one does. But where I think this could be going on the basis of that, the most likely outcome is that the ceasefire is eventually extended, that we have those talks that were 21 hours that were substantive. There'll be more talks, maybe not with the vice president, but there'll be more talks. They'll become more substantive. And that eventually I expect that the Iranians are more likely to give on the nuclear issue and on enrichment if they're able to maintain a privileged position on transit through the Strait, because that will help provide them with money and with security. They get a level of deterrence if everybody knows these guys could shut down the Strait in the future. That helps them. They never had nukes. They weren't going to get nukes. If they got nukes, they were going to get blown up. Like everyone knew that. They were 2 weeks away if they had access to the material and they reprocessed it nuclear grade and they weren't stopped by the Americans and the Israelis. That's a lot of if-ands, right? So, but here, they've got influence over the Strait. They have it. They've used it. They're using it. They're making money. Trump does not have a military plan to hit them back. So I think that is the most likely outcome. And if that is the case, then over time, the Iranians will cut more deals with more countries to get more oil out. And meanwhile, there will be, after the ceasefire is in place and strong, then the Europeans and other countries, the Indians, other countries will come in and they will start escorting ships to create a more secure environment in the Strait itself. That is the good scenario, or it's the less bad scenario, because all of this should have been avoided.
I want to make sure I'm clear on this scenario. You're saying that they'll concede on the nuclear point, Iran potentially.
At least somewhat. I think they will compromise on the nuclear point.
But in turn, they'll get more control over the strait?
Yes.
And what does that mean? That they'll be able to decide who goes through there? They'll get a toll
charge.
Oh, they'll
be able to charge. And by the way, you could define them charging the toll as part of the reconstruction money that they're going to need for the war that they just suffered.
Reparations. For the...
I mean, they'll call it reparations. No one else will call it reparations, but that's fine. I think that is the good scenario. Again, the less bad scenario. And I would say it is more likely than not. There is another scenario, right? And the other scenario is that everything that Trump has been saying is because he doesn't yet have a military plan. Over the last days, with all this ceasefire, there's still this new aircraft strike group that is motoring its way over to the Gulf. You got thousands more American troops that are heading into position. Ground troops, right? They're going to have almost 15,000 total that will be deployed by Trump since this war started. They're going to be there in the next 2 weeks. Once Trump has them there, he can use them. And there are lots of things he might use them on. He keeps saying, I keep seeing him go back. Before I was talking about all the ways he was saying, we don't need to defend the strait. We don't need the nuclear, that we can hit them. But he also has been saying, we should take the oil. I've heard him say this on a number of occasions. I've also seen him say, if just the American people were a little more patient, we could take the oil. What does he mean by taking the oil? That's not a blockade. Blockade isn't taking the oil. Blockade is stopping the Iranians from getting the oil out. Take the oil is control the export facility on Karg Island, right? And
can you explain this for anyone that doesn't know what Karg Island is and the significance of it in the oil situation?
This is a comparatively small island. It's about half the size of Manhattan. It's not incredibly fortified or defended. And it's very close to the Iranian shore. And it is responsible for 90% of the export of Iranian oil. CENTCOM, the Central Command, say that you can take Karg Island with 12 to 15,000 men relatively comfortably.
So where is Karg Island on here?
Yeah, so Karg Island is right about here. It's not in the strait itself, but it's right off of the Iranian coast. And we're talking about 90% of Iranian oil export comes out through there. So if the Americans take it, obviously very easy for the Iranians to be engaged in strikes against them, but the Iranians will not be able to get any oil out. So suddenly the Americans have far more leverage over the Iranian economy. Right? In a very direct way, in a very targeted way. And that is the way that you take the oil.
Could Trump actually take it out of this region somehow? Is there like another passage through that doesn't involve? Okay, so
no.
He could just stop the oil.
He could stop the oil.
Okay.
But again, if he has control of Karg, the oil coming out of Karg, if you want to bring it to market, the only ones that could do it would then be the Americans. Now, the Iranians at that point could still disrupt the strait. And there are other conversations, there are other military plans about how you might be able to take coastal regions, raids on the territory that would take out more ballistic missile sites, go after their drones. All of this takes more troops. All of this takes more casualties, but would also give you more capacity to eventually enforce a navigable strait with escorts, which right now you can't do. Right now, the Iranians can prevent you from getting any ships out if they wish to. I think that the likelihood that Trump is ultimately going to make that order is well below 50%. I think that the worst scenario is not the more likely one because he understands how unpopular it will be. But it does mean that he's going to have to sell a pretty ugly pig with lipstick on it. Mm-hmm. It means that because this was the problem Trump has is he can't blame anyone else for this.
Yeah.
He's the decider. Like he did it. I mean, he's got his secretaries in cabinet that are all saying, well, the war, it's up to Trump. He's got the war goals. It'll be over when he says it is. It's all about Trump. He can blame NATO for not wanting to join him. They're joining him. It was his war of choice. And he's never been responsible directly for an economic downturn. I mean, the pandemic wasn't his fault, right? This is an economic downturn with oil prices shooting up. Gas is over $4 a gallon. Diesel's over $5. Inflation's ticking up. Food prices are going up. He's wildly underwater on affordability. And he is completely responsible for it. No one else is responsible.
And zooming out even further, when we think about this on a global scale, you've got Russia, who are at war with the Ukraine. That seems to have just completely vanished from the news cycle, by the way.
It has not in Europe, I promise you, but in the United States, they're talking a lot less about it. It's true. In Poland, this is a very big issue. In the Baltics, it is a very big issue.
And then you've got China, who must be laughing because it looks like the United States are just sort of self-harming themselves.
Yep.
And then you've got Europe, which is the last power, who seem to now just be sort of colluding with themselves and getting together and saying, listen, we're not going to help the US anymore. I mean, I grew up through all these little conflicts and wars, and the UK always seemed to come to the US's call. Yeah. And for the first time ever, I'm watching the UK go, actually, no, you do this one yourself.
Not doing this.
I'm going to meet with Macron in France, and we're going to huddle and go it alone. What is that big picture? And which part of that big picture is most pertinent to talk about?
Yeah, China's the most pertinent because it's the most powerful. Russia's the easiest to deal with, which is that for the Russians, they don't have much that they produce that's manufactured. They don't have very good technology, right? They're relying more on the Chinese.
They've got oil there, haven't they?
That they manufacture. They've got oil, they've got gas, they've got fertilizer, right? All the things with the prices have just spiked through the roof. That's what the Russians have. That's where their power is. And so they are making so much more money. Their economy was really getting squeezed with all the sanctions. Now they're getting so much more for everything that they actually sell. And the Americans have reduced sanctions like they did on Iran against Russia because Trump cares about the markets, as you say. So Russia's in a better position for that reason. And they're in a better position because all the weapons the Americans have been selling to the Europeans to get to Ukraine, America now needs to get to the Middle East. So the Ukrainians are going to have a harder time defending their cities against Russian ballistic missiles, against Russian drones. So this clearly means that Putin will be much, much less interested in a ceasefire, which, let's face it, he wasn't really very interested in to begin with. Trump, at the beginning of this term, promised he would end this war. He was hugely frustrated. He goes to Israel to announce the Gaza ceasefire. It's a big win. The Knesset, the Israeli parliament, they're standing ovation. And he's like, I thought I was going to get the Russia war done, and I failed it. I haven't been able to do that. I got this one instead. Like, Trump never brings up his own failures, but this really bothers him. So here you've got yet more ability for the Russians to say, we're going to persist. And it makes it more likely that Trump will eventually do a deal with the Russians over the heads of the Europeans. So that's the Russia issue kind of in a little box. Now, Europe, we already talked about how Europe is having its problems economically. It doesn't have the productivity, it doesn't have the growth.
What did Europe do wrong, in your view? Like, I'm a European, I guess. I was born in Botswana in Africa, but I moved to the UK when I was young. So I guess I'm British. What did the country do wrong? Because the country was so strong and powerful and respected when I was younger. And I love Britain, but it appears on a global stage that perception has changed. The US are talking to us like a lapdog.
Yeah.
At Davos, I saw the talks. They're like, you need to get your shit together and be stronger and stop being so woke, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Well, first, the Americans talking to the Europeans that way has a lot more to do with the change in administration.
Okay.
I don't think any other Democratic or Republican president would do what Trump is doing to his closest allies. I think that's more unique. But it is certainly true that over the last 30 years, there have been two really big geopolitical shifts, right? The United States has shifted its orientation, but not its geopolitical power. But in terms of power shift, you've got the rise of China and the global South, India in particular after China, but China is the biggest piece of that. And then you have the decline of American allies. Europe, Canada, Japan, South Korea. These are countries, most of which are contracting demographically, right? They're countries, most of which that have much flatter growth and much more reduced productivity than the United States. They've not been investing in their own defense. They've not been investing in their own technology. So what you see is an asymmetry. At the same time that the Americans are saying, we're not interested in the rest of the world, we don't want to do all this stuff, don't want to fight the wars, don't want free trade, you're also seeing a reality where those countries don't bring as much to the table in a conversation with the United States. So the so-called Draghi plan, the 800-page plan by the former central bank head in Europe, the ECB, Mario Draghi. They called him Super Mario. He had this competitiveness report that all of these things that the Europeans needed to do, and he would say the Brits as well, to address that, to build entrepreneurship, to spend in ways that would actually bring a return long-term, to like invest in new technologies, to reduce red tape. The plan is there. But unlike the United States, unlike China, Europe is not a country. Europe is 27 countries in the EU and the United Kingdom, which decided for Brexit. It's a lot harder when you don't have scale. It's just harder. And when you have elections every, every few years, it's just more challenging. You can't do the sort of stuff that the UAE or the Saudis or the Singaporeans or the Chinese can do at scale long term. So as a consequence, what did Europe do wrong? Europe believed that the world after the wall came down in 1989, after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, they believed that the world was just going to be peaceful, that everyone was going to have a system like the Europeans did, so they didn't need to invest in defense. And it was okay if they didn't invest in lots of technology because they had friends that they could work with, and maybe their growth wouldn't be as big, but their quality of life would be so high. And they were completely wrong. China did not. They got wealthier, but they didn't suddenly align with the United States and Europe. China didn't become a free market economy. China didn't become a democracy. China is a consolidated dictatorship under Xi Jinping with no term limits and with control of the economy, state control of the economy. And that's not an easy environment for the Europeans to be comfortable being non-competitive.
A lot of this comes down to energy and productivity.
The cost of energy.
The cost of energy. So a lot of these countries decided to carry on drilling oil and pursuing nuclear. And a lot of the European countries decided to go for net zero, where they tried to focus more on sort of sustainable energy sources. Yeah. Whereas China didn't seem to give a fuck, quite frankly. The US didn't really seem to care much. And then also on this point of entrepreneurship and innovation, the US and China have both really aggressively pursued entrepreneurship and innovation and new technologies, whereas one could make the case that the European environment has been less friendly to new technologies and innovation.
Yep. So the Chinese, you said the Chinese didn't really give a fuck. Not true. The Chinese have invested in everything. So the Chinese know that they still need lots of dirty coal in order to power their industry. But they also have invested like nobody else in green technologies at scale.
Solar and things like that.
Solar and wind, and their car companies are the electric vehicle leaders in the world, and batteries that are the best batteries, the most efficient batteries at scale in the world, and all of the materials, the raw materials that go into producing those. The Chinese have invested in this for decades now, and nuclear. Right. While the Europeans have, with the exception of France is, has heavy nuclear, and that's helped them in this crisis. Most of the Europeans have turned away from nuclear. The Europeans have not done an all for all approach. The Europeans have done a let's lean into green, but let's make other technologies more challenging, including nuclear, which should be seen as a green technology. So yeah, there's no question that has inhibited growth in Europe. The United States has been on again, off again. You've got one administration that's leaning into green, the next one that's not, when America should be doing. America today is the world's leading oil producer by a long margin, and fracking natural gas as well by a long margin, doing incredible work there. Yet the United States is actively undermining the ability to also produce clean technologies for energy. Texas produces more sustainable energy than any other state in the United States. Red Texas. So, I mean, it's not like these energy technologies are not Republican or Democrat. They are at scale, becoming cheaper. You need all of them. And so the Europeans made a mistake in not recognizing that you need everything.
Everybody says that the United States is the world's leading superpower. And that has been the case, hard to argue against that for a long time. Is that set to change? Is China set to become the world's leading superpower?
Not soon, but the present trajectory, if it continues, clearly would challenge America's dominant position. Clearly. I mean, the U.S. the dollar is the global reserve currency right now. Nothing else is close. And transacting in the dollar is a huge advantage for the Americans who can continue to print money with reckless abandon and run massive deficits and have lower interest rates as a consequence. China does not have a convertible currency. They don't have rule of law. If they opened their currency to become convertible, there'd be massive capital flight and political instability. That's what they worry about. So they don't compete with the US there.